What's up everyone? Today I am going to show you exactly how you can build a garden bed for as little as 300 bucks that will leave you dependent on the biggest home gardening corporation in America for years to come. And then I'll show you how you can be an annoying, snobby nerd and do it for free instead. Miracle-Gro is the household name for home gardening in the US. It makes up 60% of the lawn and garden care market in the US and provides an estimated 65 to 70% of fertilizer to home growers. To fill up a standard 12-inch high, 8-foot by 4-foot raised bed, you're going to need to purchase about 20 of these garden soil bags, and that's going to run you $169 before tax. Not to mention the mulch, which is going to cost you another 20 bucks. For the raised bed materials, Home Depot had these laid out at my local store. So assuming that they'll split one of these 8-footers in half for you, you can get 3 2x12s and 4 of the bracers, and you're looking at a raised bed for just shy of $105. And add it all up, and you're looking at a grand total of $295.07 before tax. Now, assuming that we were able to bum some seeds or maybe an extra plant start from a friend or relative or neighbor, we're ready to go with our beautiful Miracle-Gro raised bed. At this point, you might be doing the math. Was this worth it? 300 bucks for $50 worth of veggies? But then you remember, well, this was spendy because I'm just starting now. Next year, I won't have to spend anything more. Maybe though, you go back to the Home Depot, ask a garden center specialist why your plants didn't grow the best, and they'll tell you, well, you gotta fertilize. And at this point, they've got you, because the reality is you've accidentally trained your soil to not hold on to nutrients. But why is that? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at these products that I have here. I went ahead and actually got some of these because I like to support local businesses, and I also have some long-term tests that I want to trial in my garden. But let's go ahead and take a look at what we have. This first bag is the all-purpose garden soil from Miracle-Gro. Now, they have instructions on how to use this stuff based on if you've got pre-existing garden beds or if you're going to add it to your native soil. But assuming that we are just starting out, we're just going to fill up our raised beds with this stuff. Now, in the ingredients, we have a pretty standard Miracle-Gro recipe. This product is formulated from one or more of the following: peat, processed forest products, coir, and or compost. And then we got some sphagnum, peat moss, some fertilizer, and a wetting agent. All in all, this stuff is basically shredded, ground up carbon material. Nothing terribly wrong with this, although we might inquire into the sourcing of that material. The two things that stand out that we might want to check out are the fertilizer and the wetting agent. Now, I've talked about the wetting agent that Miracle-Gro uses a little bit in previous videos. They don't really tell you exactly what it is unless you go digging through boring files that are archived somewhere on a strange website. Never a good sign. I'll suffice it to say that the wetting agent is maybe a less than ideal substance that helps the soil retain moisture. Now, for the fertilizer, we can look a little lower on the package and find the exact NPK breakdown. This one is pretty light. It's got a small amount of ammonia and nitrate, and then some phosphate and potash, a portion of which for each of them has been coated with a polymer that gradually dissolves over time as it gets wet and slowly releases those nutrients into the soil where the plant that you put there can get them. And that's why they say that this feeds, oh my goodness, look at that butterfly. And that's why they say that it feeds soil for 2 months. It's because that's how long until the polymer coating has fully dissolved and the fertilizer has been either uptaken by plant roots or drained out the bottom. After that time, the soil is going to be lacking in nutrients, and more importantly, it's going to be lacking in biology. Because these bagged mixes are sealed up tight and then they sit in the hot sun baking for God knows how long before you come to pick them up. There might be a little bit of biology in there. There's not too many ways of knowing what kind or quality it might be. We'll come back to the biology part of the conversation when we look at how we can save this soil. For now, I actually want to take a look at one of the other bags that I have here, the mulch bag. EarthGrow is Scott's Miracle-Gro's mulch brand, and I could find mulch in 3 colors. Red, black, and brown. Went with brown because it felt the most natural. But why is it actually brown? I really love this packaging. It says 12 months color advantage. Proud to be locally made. Helps prevent weeds, helps conserve soil moisture, free of construction debris, great. And most importantly, it's easy to carry. Pretty simple ingredients on this one. We've got forest products and colorant, which you gotta ask, like, why color it? Now, Scott's website says that the colorant is non-toxic and completely safe to use around pets and children, which is nice, even though it smells pretty ripe. When I looked it up, what is actually in the brown coating, I could only find that it was a water-based coating made primarily out of iron oxide and basic binding agents that help the pigment stick to the wood fibers. Exactly the type of stuff I'm already putting in my garden. Now, this third bag represents the conscientious buyer. This organic version of the raised bed and garden soil mix is surprisingly only about $1.50 more per bag, which I feel like they could charge at least $2. This stuff is locally crafted, it's peat-free, and it's made from upcycled green waste. Peat moss, if you didn't know, is a non-renewable resource, and then upcycling is probably a good thing. But the question that I want to ask of a company that is committed to protecting the environment is, why have an organic and a non-organic option? And this is a question that I think needs to be asked probably a whole lot more about other things, by the way, like food for starters. But I think about how weird it is to have two products. One that you can pay more for if you want to be healthier and do it more eco-consciously, and then one where you don't do that, but you get to spend less. Why don't we just make it all organic? But I digress. In this bright pink bag, we've got the forest products again, but this time we've also got something called manure digestate, which after looking up is just manure that has been anaerobically digested or fermented alongside food processing waste, processed manure again, agricultural processing waste, and or compost. And finally, fertilizer, which if you read a little bit further down, we see comes from poultry litter. No wetting agent in this stuff, no chemical fertilizers, OMRI list sanctioned. But unfortunately, I can't say that the biological component of this stuff is much better than the original budget-friendly option. So what are we doing here? Will this stuff grow plants? Absolutely. They wouldn't be selling it if it didn't. But when you get into the Miracle-Gro ecosystem, you quickly realize that it's designed to be a package deal. Synthetic fertilizer, you might say, is just organic fertilizer broken down into the plant available form already. The plant doesn't know the difference. Both entirely true statements. That said, I personally have never used synthetic fertilizer before and have grown plenty, this season thousands of plants. But why is that? How are some people able to grow stuff without the fertilizers and others feel the need to use them? Well, Miracle-Gro cuts out a lot of the work. We've had to put some serious effort into being able to grow so many plants without buying store-bought fertilizer. And if you don't mind spending the money and you don't exactly care how your plants are grown, you just want to grow them, then you can just use the path that Miracle-Gro has laid out for you. There's nothing really terribly wrong with that. Personally, I'm fairly committed to showcasing alternative paths from the strict conventional approach. And honestly, because Miracle-Gro as a brand is so dominant and is so committed to pretending that their way is the only way, I think it's important to reinsert the pre-Miracle-Gro knowledge of natural gardening. So that's what we're doing here. To replicate and course correct the path a bit, we're going to take a look at how to make something like this and then how to use it. For the first ingredient in the list, on the back of the bag, we've got a bunch of options to choose from. Peat, forest products, cocoa coir, and compost. Now, with the exception of compost, all of these refer to carbon-rich substances, likely fairly broken down. You can purchase peat moss or cocoa coir. We use cocoa coir in our potting mix, and then we found some peat moss someone was selling for cheap on Facebook Marketplace. But we also have a bunch of leaf mold that we could use. Leaf mold like this can be made in a few years' time. So if you have the patience, you can collect a bunch of leaves, shred them up with a lawnmower, make a pile, keep it damp and aerated, and then in a few years, you'll have some beautifully fluffy, fungi-rich carbon material. Now, we're not going to add the wetting agent, obviously, and we don't have a machine on site that converts atmospheric nitrogen and hydrogen gas into ammonia, let alone a way to pelletize it and coat it with a polymer. But if we take some notes from the 2.0 version, we can find some alternatives. But if we take some notes from the 2.0 version, we can come up with some alternatives. First up, while they don't directly say it, the manure digestate is going to contain some nitrogen, and it's something that we can make a version of at home. And in fact, we have it right here. This is a batch of manure Jadam liquid fertilizer. It's just cow manure and a handful of leaf mold soil and water. And it's been left to anaerobically ferment and putrefy over the course of the last month. So it's starting to be ready to use. And if you make this, you probably want to let it decompose for even longer, like a year, and then it'll be very decomposed. But this stuff is totally fine to mix up into your carbon material. And then you might remember that for the fertilizer in this bag, it actually says that it's just chicken manure. Chicken manure is pretty high in nitrogen, so you want to be careful how much you add. They say that this contains 0.05% total nitrogen. Chicken turds typically fall in the range of 5% total nitrogen by dry weight, which means that we need to add 10 parts carbon materials to 1 part chicken manure, and we should be good to go. Or we could just go scoop up our chicken bedding, which practically looks like soil already, compost it, and call it a good replacement. This bedding is all the weeds, leaves, straw, wood chips, and other organic material from our yard shredded up and pooped on by our chickens. When we compost it, we help the nitrogen that's get locked into a more stable form. We culture beneficial microorganisms by doing this as well. Here's some compost that is not even close to being finished. It's still quite hot. It's made out of chicken bedding mixed up with some grass clippings and some aged cow manure, and eventually it will cool down in temperature and be ready to use. Stacking up materials, wetting them down, and then flipping them every once in a while generates a lot of microbial activity, and that activity results in microbial respiration, which means that a good amount of heat gets generated, which kills off potential pathogens in the manure. It also kills off any weed seeds that get in there. You can check out our recent composting video if you want to learn about how to make hot compost just like this. But let's venture into the garden. Hey, real quick, you probably know that most of the food that we buy from the grocery store is contaminated with chemicals that are harmful to human health and the environment. Even organic fruits and veggies test positive for toxic pesticide residues, which is why so many people are starting to grow more of their own food. But most people start gardening only to realize how hard it is to do without the chemicals. And so you might find yourself dependent on the very chemicals that you're trying to avoid in the first place. That's why I created the Natural Garden Reboot, to help gardeners ditch the chemicals forever, address the root issues with your soil, and to use what you have available to you already to build natural fertility, to grow healthy plants without the need for harsh chemicals, and to reduce your reliance on the big home gardening corporations that don't care about your health or the health of the environment. Hit the link in the video description or scan the code on the screen to book a call to meet with me. I'll help you identify where things in your garden might be going wrong and why, and we can decide together if you would be a good fit for the Natural Garden Reboot. Now, back here by our tomato and cucumber plants, we took some compost just like that and laid it down on top of the soil as sort of mulch layer, and then we planted into the native soil below. Something they instruct you to do on the Miracle-Gro packaging is to mix their soil into the top layers of your soil if you're adding it to your native soil. But if you think about nature or perhaps a natural forest, organic matter is very rarely and maybe never intentionally mixed into the lower layers of the soil all at once. It occurs over a long period of time. Animals step on fallen leaves and push them down a little bit into the forest floor. Birds might land and scratch through them to look for grubs. And then earthworms will gradually carry leaf mold down into the lower layers of the soil, along with rainfall and microorganisms. This happens slowly. What happens quickly is that when we water or when it rains, the microorganisms from the organic matter on the soil surface get washed down into the soil and continue their activity there. Their activity being breaking down soil particles and organic matter into bioavailable nutrients, which they can then exchange for plant root exudates. If, on the flip side, we were just to mix the Miracle-Gro garden soil into our native soil and then plant the tomatoes into that, there might be some pre-existing biological activity in the native soil, but they wouldn't be as necessary of a player here because the nutrients in the bagged mix are all water soluble, meaning that they don't need to be processed by microorganisms. They're already ready to be soaked up by the tomato plant roots. And with that instant access, were we to have used Miracle-Gro garden soil or even their NPK fertilizer, these tomato plants would be much bigger by now. This is why Miracle-Gro is such a thriving company. They found a way to give gardeners a very gratifying experience. They claim that their products make plants grow twice as big. Whether that's precisely true or not, there's no denying that they definitely give them a big boost. So why not just go down that route and save yourself the hassle of composting, especially if it results in smaller plants? Well, I'm glad you asked. First of all, and I think that this is a big one for a lot of growers, but so long as you're in the Miracle-Gro ecosystem, they're kind of putting the cap on your growing capacity. Anytime that you want to expand or grow more, you have to purchase more from them. More garden soil, more fertilizer, not to mention their brown dyed mulch to keep your soil from drying out. Doing it yourself, you do have to source your own materials, but honestly, they're usually pretty easy to find, and most of the time, they're things that a lot of people consider waste products that they want to get rid of anyway. The second reason is because the more that you put the soil microbes out of work by skipping the nutrient exchange process, the less those microbes will be able to defend your plants from disease and pest damage and connection to other plants in your garden. With the biology really active in this soil, all of these plants are interconnected. They're able to share nutrients and give immune support. And the third reason is because the organic route doesn't actually mean you need to have smaller yields. In fact, it can actually result in much more consistent and robust harvests. With a synthetic fertilizer approach, you actually are trying to control something that you have very little understanding or control over. How and when plants uptake and utilize nutrients. Some plants need less nitrogen than others. Most plants need less nitrogen when they're forming their flower buds and fruits. If you give these guys the nitrogen IV drip all season long, it's possible that you'll actually produce way more leaves than actual tomatoes. When you encourage microbial populations in your soil, you're handing the reins to the experts. Microbes and plants working together have a much better understanding of what nutrients are needed at what time in that plant's life cycle. They both have a vested interest in the plant surviving and reproducing. So what do? Well, when tomato plants begin to flower and form fruits, their root exudate profile changes to recruit phosphate solubilizing bacteria and arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Plainly said, when tomatoes are starting to flower and fruit, they start to ask for help from different microbes in the soil whose specific job it is to make phosphorus available from within the soil to the tomato plant. They also exude different carbohydrates to cue soil bacteria to produce organic acids that dissolve mineralized calcium that is then transported directly into the tomato plant. And what does this do? Well, if you've ever eaten a mushy tomato, it's likely that the tomato plant struggled mobilizing calcium to make its fruit. Calcium makes the structure, the skeleton of the tomato, and we have other ways that we stimulate this kind of activity in our tomato plants as well. The point is, without the biology in your soil, you're running a higher risk of your tomatoes growing mushy or even blossom end rotted fruit. And this is just one small example of why an organic approach isn't really an environmental hippie sort of concern as much as it is a practical one. Your plants might start off growing a little bit slower than if you give them the steroid shot of synthetic nitrogen, but in the long run, you're gonna get as much, if not more, and likely better produce from the natural grown version. An argument that I've heard for new gardeners using Miracle-Gro is that it provides them with an easy win for them as they're starting out, learning how to garden in the first place so they don't get discouraged and that they actually keep going. But I kind of disagree. I think it's maybe more likely that someone who starts on Miracle-Gro will have a harder time weaning off it than just quitting altogether. I don't actually have data to support that. I've never used their products until this year, like I said, where I'm actually running some long-term experiments. Now, if you have this soil in your garden right now, or maybe you even went the full route of filling an entire raised bed with Miracle-Gro mix, or maybe you're just tired of buying fertilizer to replace the stuff that gets used up all the time, what can you do? Well, the first and probably easiest thing that you could do is just start a passive compost pile where you dump your yard debris, your fruit and veggie scraps, and your crop residue at the end of the season. Just making a pile of decomposing organic matter will help you to start culturing biological activity and building up organic nutrients that you can use in your garden the following year. In addition to that, fill up a bucket with green material, fill it with water, and then find a natural forest where you can collect some of the soil that's beneath the leaf litter and put that in the bucket. You can mix this up from time to time, let it ferment, cover it up, and then the following spring, you can strain out the remaining plant residue, and that liquid is going to be your fertilizer replacement. For this year, you probably want to do two things. One, remove the dyed mulch, sell it on Facebook Marketplace, and replace it with a fully natural mulch like dried leaves, straw, or plain wood chips. You can usually find people giving these away also on Facebook, or just drive around your neighborhood and ask people if you can take their bags of leaves for them. And then to get some external biology into your garden, I want you to make a microbial solution. Now, I'll give you a brief description of how to make this here, but I'll also provide links to recipes for this and other things that I mentioned in the description of this video. If you want to access all of them and more, you can scan the code on the screen or hit the link in the description, and you can join my free natural gardening community on School. Get access to everything there. Plus, if you want some help and support from the community, you can post pictures and ask questions and get answers. To make this microbial solution, it's just some of the same leaf mold soil from the fertilizer, cooked mashed potato, a little bit of sea salt, and water. It takes a few days to brew, but once there's a lot of foam on the surface of the water, you can take that and dilute it and pour it over your soil. This is going to start to reintroduce the beneficial biology that the Miracle-Gro soil is lacking. Guys, I hope that this video was informative and more importantly, empowering. Cassidy and my goal for this channel has been and is to give you options, ideas, and solutions to gardening problems that you might be facing. If you are interested in learning about even more ways that you can unlock fertility in your soil through the use of homemade garden soil amendments, you will want to check out this video next. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.